My name is Nancy Proctor. I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at the Peel. For today's online program, you can turn on captions. That's something you can control within Zoom at your end. Unfortunately, due to a scheduling error, we do not have an ASL interpreter for today's program, but the recording and the transcript will be available afterwards as well. I hasten to add that accessibility is a core value here at the Peel, so you will find our programs ASL interpreted and captioned almost always, so please tell your friends. Our aim is to be accessible to all. The Peel's mission is about amplifying and sharing the voices and stories that too often have been overlooked or intentionally erased from the historical record. So it's a particular honor to welcome you to this first in Baltimore National Heritage Area's 2023 It's More Than History lecture series. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the Peel in Baltimore stands on the traditional ancestral and unceded lands of a number of indigenous peoples, including the Lenape and Susquehannock. Our work is ongoing to better understand the pre-colonial history of our city and region, and also to support the indigenous peoples who are part of our communities today. I'd like to thank Ryan Coons and the Maryland State Arts Council for the references they've made available to us in thinking about land acknowledgements in our history here at the Peel, and also to local leaders like Ashley Minner for ensuring that Indigenous voices are heard and recognized in Baltimore today. You can pick up your copy of Reservation, East Baltimore's historic American Indian walking tour map from the Peel, and also download the Guide to Indigenous Baltimore app for free. We also have a big weekend at the historic Peel Museum building in downtown Baltimore today and Sunday, there we go, starting tonight at 6 p.m. with the Say It Loud Film Festival, which is curated by Tony Mendez. It's free to come see short films by Baltimore-based Black filmmakers and live performances as well, so please join us. And on Sunday, we are delighted to host a concert of virtuoso saxophone and accordion performances brought to us from the Candlelight Concert Society. That's from 3 to 5 p.m., and you can get your tickets on our website. And now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Shante Daniels, Executive Director of the Baltimore National Heritage Area, my dear friend and the Peel's guardian angel. Shante, thank you for once again bringing compelling and insightful presenters and programs to the Peel. Now, please take it away. And I'm just going to slide the camera over. As you can see, we're in front of the Peel. They're in Holiday Street. And hey, presto.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this program. I would also like to thank Chris Haley. Chris, this is his second year with us presenting compelling stories that have to do with Maryland. And so we are always delighted to have him on board to give us a little history, a little bit. It's more than history. It all connects to all of us. So I don't want to take up any more time, but I do want you to listen to what Nancy just mentioned, is to come out tonight to the Say It Loud Film Festival, because the Heritage Area will also be premiering another film that we've done called It's More Than, in the Name of Freedom, which basically analyzes the African Americans from Maryland that have played a part in history at war and going to other countries and protecting their sovereignty. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to come out tonight. And I want to give Chris a very warm welcome for him partnering with us. And thanks the Peel for being a huge partner in this lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me on this afternoon. Thank you, Shante. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone who's involved with this, the Peel and the BNHA, and also the archives for allowing me the time to do this. I'm doing this from my lovely home, which I call the Blur Mansion. As you can see behind me, we have a lot of blurry things behind me. There's all over. So I love the way that you began it. You just slid from one room to the other, or one presenter to the other. If I slide from one to the other, you see it's still blurred. It's amazing that way. That's why it's called the Blur Mansion. So with my presentation today called There Was Slavery in Maryland, ? Came out of a really out of a conversation I had with one of my doctors, and who literally, I guess I have to be seeing, you have your annual checkups and this, that, and the other. And as far as what we saw, we call it just regular talk. He said, "So what do you do again?" And I said, "Well, I'm director of the study of the legacy of slavery in Maryland at the Maryland State Archives." And he literally said to me, "There was slavery in Maryland?" So it's a quote. It's literally a quote. Now, he's from another country, so I figure that's partially why he said that. But also, it's something that I feel like I've heard either that phrase or the approximation of it many other times in my life. So I thought that when Director Daniels asked me about doing another presentation for BNHA and the Peel, I thought maybe that would be a good one to broach, because I think there's a lot of things we take for granted because we're in the history field that others just don't know. And so they believe what they've been told, they believe what they've read, they believe what's on the internet, which of course everybody and anybody can get to, even if you go to the library. So I thought, let me just try to touch on a few things which I feel are either true to confirm or mythologized to clarify and see what the truth is. And just know that within 45 minutes, there's so many more things that are out there. However, I'm going to try to give you sources as to how I found these things too, so you can do your own research to verify some things so that you're not just reading or accepting what everybody says at face value. And with that, I'd like to begin. And just to make sure it's true, today is February 24th, 2023. Now, I'm not sure if on your screen, you see what's on my screen, and one thing went away. There might be some bars there on there just because there's some type of computer thing that's going on, but hopefully it doesn't get in front of whatever is being presented, whatever is being shown. If so, I will definitely describe it to you, okay? Okay, next slide, please, or first slide, really. Was Maryland a slave state? Again, that's what started this whole idea of why I should broach this, because in many times I'll have conversations with other historians or at places such as community centers or with high schools or grade schools. I've talked about the legacy of enslavement to as young students as third grade. And of course, I take it in a very, very light manner, which is just saying how it is to be owned by somebody else when you're not in control of yourself or your family, and neither are your parents in charge of you. That's how I broach it, so that it's not, it's sort of easy just to grasp onto it. But this is the reality, is that Maryland was a state in which slavery existed, and it existed because people there were able to make a lot of money from the enslavement of individuals who were not of the same, I guess, class and then race as they were. Maryland was considered a border state, which I'll go into later, but this is the outline. And in all of Maryland's counties that were in existence at slavery's end in 1864, there was slavery. Next slide. But before there was slavery, there was indentured servitude. Aboard the Ark and the Dove, as you see right here in this panel, of the 140 who embarked from England to get here, 120 approximately survived. Among those two were two people of African and Portuguese descent. One was named Matthias de Souza. This is an artist rendition. Certainly we have nothing that literally is an illustration of Matthias de Souza. And also another person named Francisco, who was also a Portuguese descendant, and he was called a mulatto because of his mixed heritage. He was an indentured servant, which meant that his service was indentured to another individual for a certain amount of time, after which time was served, he would be granted his freedom and then be given a suit of clothes or an ox and maybe a cart in order that he could plow the field and tend to his own livelihood, his own welfare for himself and his family. And this is how Maryland conducted itself as far as service goes and servants go from its founding on March 24th, which we call Maryland Day, 1634, to approximately 1634, when things ultimately changed. Next slide. Now, as far as indentured servitude happened, this is in 1661 when the law was clarified. And if you see in the very old, I guess one would say, I'll even call it hieroglyphics because it's so hard for us to read this here, but just to give some of the idea what the terms are and just to read it more specifically for you, because it took me a while to get it myself. The first arrival into this province, the full time of 4 years would be served if between the age of 18 and 2 and 22 years, meaning that if the person was between 18 and 22 years of age, they were brought over here by someone who was their, let's say their, I guess one could almost say owner. In England, sending them over here to settle the land, to work the land, if they were between 18 and 22 years of age, they would have to serve their indentured servitude for 4 years. It would be 5 years if they were younger, between the ages of 15 and 18. It would be 6 years if any servant who was under 15 years of age and coming in aforesaid shall serve till he or she arrive to the age of 21 years. So that's the big difference I want to clarify for the beginning as what indentured servitude was, which could be a person of African descent, a person of European descent, or a person, a Native American or Indian, all could share this same status of indentured servitude. Then 1664 happens. Next slide, please. Just again, some nice term. Well, there's another block here. Some old script of how it looks. An act concerning Negroes and other slaves. And just to clarify, that's because Negroes and slaves at that point was considered synonymous. So a person was just putting that in there so that people would know that that means the same thing. Now, because that's such small print, I'll go to the next slide to get to what's more special about it, or more clear about it for you and me. All Negroes currently in the province or hereafter reported shall be slaves durante vita, which means throughout their lives. All children born of Negro or other slaves shall be slaves as their fathers were for the term of their lives. That's very important to remember, that as their fathers were for the term of their lives in 1664. That whatsoever freeborn woman shall intermarry with any slave from and after the last day of the present assembly shall serve the master of such slave during the life of her husband. Which means if you're a freeborn woman and you marry with someone who's enslaved, then you would have to serve that same master that your husband serves until your husband passed away. That all issues of English or freeborn women that have already married Negroes shall serve the masters of their parents till they be 30 years of age and no longer. Now, of course, what that means is that if they have any children, these people who intermarried, if they have any children, those children will have to serve the masters of their parents, because at that point, both mother and father will be servants or enslaved by that master until they're 30 years of age. So there really is a punitive element put toward or put against intermarriage once slavery has been race-based in Maryland. Next slide. Now that was 1664. And just to reiterate, all children born of Negro or other slaves shall be slaves as their fathers were for the term of their lives. However, in 1681, that act is repealed and children assume status of their mother, whether free or enslaved. Specifically what the 1681 law shows, and it's a very, very long passage, which I didn't want to put in here, but you can find it under Archives of Maryland from the Maryland State Archives website. And if you look at the 1681 session laws, it's a very long passage, but you can find it spelled out very specifically. It comes down to any freeborn woman who has issue, their children shall be free as they are. And they will be free from that point on. Accordingly, they would be enslaved as that free woman was if she was enslaved. So that's where it changes. And just as far as one of the things that's been said, out there is that people of different races were also enslaved. No, people of different races in Maryland were also indentured servants, but they were only enslaved if they were of African descent. Next slide. Now, having read that to you, having shown you what the actual documents dictate, the question could be sensibly asked, since interracial marriage was illegal, Blacks and whites didn't marry, right? However, because of the project that we undertook almost 20 years ago, where we randomly looked through all the runaway ads and domestic traffic notices from a number of different counties in Maryland through the different newspapers that we have access to at the archives, we were able to find runaway ads such as these. And I'll read the short one first, the $30 one. This is in 1794, mind you, 1794. Ran away from the subscriber the 9th of April last, a Negro man named Palmer, about 5 feet 6 inches high, strong built, bow-legged. He had the white wife near Mount Pleasant. I'll say that again. He had the white wife near Mount Pleasant. He's a Negro man named Palmer. Anne Arundel County, living on Isaac Simmons's land, the above reward will be paid by subscribers to any person who will bring him home without any charges. Thomas Boyd is the owner who's putting out this ad to try to get his Negro man back, who's acknowledging that this Negro man has a white wife in 1794. The other ad, a little bit earlier, 1781. So let's say 100 years after that 1681 law, we have this other, a little bit more verbose runaway ad. $4,000 reward. Now, take into account 1781 is right when we're in the midst of the ending of the American Revolution. So we're just changing from the pound to the dollar. So that may not be exactly what we consider $4,000 reward, but certainly it's still considerable. Ran away from the subscriber on the 22nd day of January instant, a white mulatto slave, meaning a very light-skinned individual is what that really turns out to be, named Leonard, 32 years of age, about 6 feet high, well-made, strong, healthy fellow, has a scar on the upper lip and chin, which were split by sawing at the whip saw, another under his jaw caused by swelling. He wears his hair hanging short behind and is much sunburnt. Had on when he went away, a short blue cloth coat and waistcoat, leather breeches, white yarn stockings, and took several pairs of shoes, etc. with him. He is a carpenter by trade and took with him some carpenter's and joiner's tools. He was persuaded off by a white woman who calls herself Rachel Dorsey and says that about 8 or 9 years ago, she left Pennsylvania. It appears that she had 2 children by the above slave, both boys, the eldest named Samuel, about 5 years of age, the other named Basil, 2 years of age. It is supposed they will pass for man and wife and make for Pennsylvania or the Eastern Shore. Whoever takes up the said slave and secures him in jail so that I get him again shall receive $2,000 and if brought home, the above reward paid by Barbara Williams. So, of course, to take into account, if you haven't seen these before, runaway ads are very, very, very specific as to who the individual were or was, because we have to remember that there's no photographic services of any type. You'd have to paint someone, you'd have to illustrate someone using a pencil and some type of parchment that you could use. And you wanted to get your property back, because if you weren't, you would be stealing from somebody else. And also, when we think about the hypocrisy or the dichotomy of treating people as chattel, and yet at the same time acknowledging that they have children, acknowledging that they have a spouse who would have aided them to escape. And also in this particular ad about Leonard, I just wonder myself if there might be some jealousy on it, because Barbara Williams is the one who's asking for Leonard, who she does describe in a very strong and handsome manner. But even at that, she's acknowledging that this Leonard is married to a white woman and they have 2 children in 1781. So marriages still happened. Next slide. And to show what perhaps they were very worried about, these are ads right here, which again, I just randomly found through our database. And these images here are just images that I put into Google, the terms that are used in these ads, and just the computer picked what the representation of these words could be. And I put this out there so that to remind us that the individuals who were looking to bring these people back into custody or into servitude, they would not be thinking of someone who looked my complexion or the complexion of a LeVar Burton in the original Roots or what have you. They would look at these ads and they might very well look to these individuals here, a person who might be considered a white mulatto slave as Leonard was, such as I'll read the one where it says manager wanted, who offers a reward of $25 for the apprehension and return to him of a mulatto boy named John, who ran away from him on Sunday week. He is of very light complexion, blue eyes, and has light brown straight hair, is about 5 feet 7 or 8 inches high, and has a joint off the forefinger of his hand. So someone who was trying to get those $25, this is a type of image that they might look to see to be the person who is described in this ad so they could be rewarded with $25. In this notice, which is a committal notice of someone who says his name is William Thomas, says he is free. He says he came from New Orleans, had on when he was committed to the jail, a gray castanet coat and pantaloons and white hat about half worn, is very bright, nearly white. He is a stout, likely well-made fellow, about 5 feet 7.5 inches high and between 21 and 22 years of age. He has a scar on his left ankle, occasioned by a cut from an axe. Now, certainly that's not William Thomas above, but when I put in those descriptors, very bright, nearly white, he is a likely well-made fellow or a boy, this is the image I get. So just to keep in mind that in the time when slavery was legal and when it was a very commercially profitable venture, those are the faces that might be sought out in difference to what we might think today. Next slide. Now, when would marriages between different races have been legal again? In Maryland, not officially until 1967. That's when the law was repealed. A marriage and bearing of mixed race children was illegal and incurred serious punishments until the law was repealed in 1967. Now, certainly we saw already that individuals were getting married and individuals were having children of mixed race relationships. My thinking is that probably it happened and sometimes it was legislated against, and sometimes it wasn't. But it would have been legal to find somebody and accuse somebody and have somebody jailed for that until 1967. And again, you can find that in the Archives of Maryland, Maryland State Archives, under General Assembly, Chapter 6, 1967 laws. Next slide. And I would look for any other state that you're trying to find information about. Always look to see whatever their city is or wherever their capital city is, that should be the place where they actually have the permanent records of that institution. And hopefully they would also have had some of their laws would have been electrically represented or digitized so that you can get to them. Because any community, any civilization, any culture is going to have laws which are dealing with what's going on in their community at the time, or what they fear is going to go on in the future, or what they want to cease occurring, such as interracial marriages here. Another question that I've heard here and there, and something I did not know myself, I took for granted before I started working at the archives in Maryland specifically, was cotton. Cotton was something that I feel is also a cliche with enslavement, that if someone worked the field, if an enslaved person worked the field, they probably picked cotton. Literally, when I was in grade school, there was a song I was taught to sing, "Cotton Needs a Picking So Bad." I literally was, and it was a mixed, probably 50-50 black and white school. And I was literally taught that song. I don't know if I thought it had to do with slavery. I don't think I did, but I literally was taught that song. Here's a fact. Was a cotton the main crop sold everywhere slavery existed? And it wasn't here in Maryland. Tobacco, not cotton, was the main crop. And it was so universally, or let's say regionally, at least within our state, valued that it was considered a a barter, a commercial value to it, such as when we go back to the marriage issue, it was something that would be a penalty in addition to how you might be penalized some time in prison, or today when you might be judged guilty of some crime and you might be sentenced to jail and fined certain thousands of dollars. At this time, you could be sentenced to jail and then sentenced to come across with pounds and pounds and pounds of tobacco as payment for your for whatever your infringement was against whatever crime you committed, such as, and any priest, minister, magistrate, or other person whatsoever. Because again, these people were getting married. Somebody had to marry them. What happened to them? Was it all right for them? Not necessarily. Any priest, minister, magistrate, or a person whatsoever within this province that shall, from and after the publication hereof, join in marriage any Negro or other slave to any English or other slave to any English or other white woman, servant freeborn, as aforesaid, shall forfeit and pay the sum of 10,000 pounds of tobacco, one half to the Lord Proprietor and the other half to the informer of the person aggrieved. So that's also something that reminds you of the fact that not only could it be an issue because some magistrate found you in this situation, but if your neighbor decided that they were really low on tobacco or whatever they would need it for, they could inform about your marital status, inform about the person who married you, and they would be rewarded for that. So that's something else to tell you about how, regardless of the love you might have for that individual, how risky a proposition it was for you and for the person who married you. Next slide. Something else that's been said often is that persons of African descent, it was illegal for them to read and write. Literally, it was against the law for them to read and write. And I feel like that comes to mind mostly, certainly in Maryland, comes to mind because of the issue of the example, the matter of Samuel L. Green. This is an illustration of Samuel Green. Samuel Green was arrested for being able to read and write. Frederick Douglass was punished for being able to read and write. The first statement is not true. The second statement is true. The reality is that Samuel Green was arrested for having a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. That's what he was arrested for, because that was against the law. And if you see in chapter 72, which I put a little bit of it here so you could see it, be it enacted that the General Assembly of Maryland, that if any free Negro or mulatto shall knowingly call for, demand, or receive any abolition handbill, pamphlet, newspaper, pictorial representation, or other paper of an inflammatory character, having a tendency to create discontent amongst or stir up to insurrection the people of color in this state, at or from any post office situated within this state, or shall knowingly receive or have in his or her possession any such handbill, pamphlet, newspaper, pictorial representations, or other paper, they're covering everything, he or she shall be deemed guilty of felony, and upon conviction shall be sentenced to undergo a confinement in the penitentiary of his state for a period of not less than 10, no more than 20 years from the time of sentence pronounced of such offender. That's what Samuel Green was actually arrested for. What happened with Frederick Douglass is that he was punished because it was found by his wife's master, or it was found by the wife of his master, that she was helping him to understand what letters meant. So he was able to read. So the master, or let's say Frederick Douglass's mistress's husband, scolded her for having done so and punished Frederick Douglass for doing so. And so he was punished for being able to read and write. But nowhere we've been able to find in the archives laws, the Maryland archives laws, was it ever considered against the law legally to be able to read and write. Samuel Green was arrested for having a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, that said, I do believe it was illegal in other states. Off the top of my head, I think Virginia might have been one, and I think South Carolina might have been another one. I'm not sure about that, but I do think it was actually illegal to read and write in other states for a person of color. Next slide. Also, one should know that not all persons of African descent were ever enslaved. Benjamin Banneker, Francis Harper were both born free. Benjamin Banneker was born free because his grandmother, I think I have this right, his grandmother was an indentured servant. She married an enslaved person after she was freed. She freed the enslaved person who was named Bannaky. So because she was free and her husband was then freed, the child they had named Mary was freeborn. Mary was the mother of Banneker Douglas, Benjamin Banneker, Banneker Douglas. I'm thinking about the museum of Benjamin Banneker. So he was never enslaved. Frances Ellen Watkins was also born free, also born in Baltimore, Maryland. So these are two individuals from Maryland who lived their lives as free persons. I do not know for sure, I haven't studied this, if they both were required to have what's called certificates of freedom, which were parchments or materials which they literally would have to have, like you'd have a license today to indicate that you would have, that you're legally able to drive. They would have to have a document which would show that they are legally free individuals, because as we saw from the earlier laws, the supposition for a person of color was that you were enslaved, because from 1664 on, that's what was the status quo. Next slide. And just to give you a sense of this is from the University of Virginia website. Unfortunately, it's not available anymore. They have ceased this site. You have to go to another place, but we had already saved it on the Maryland State Archive. So yay, we're able to get to this. This is a chart for all the different counties in Maryland with different categories of free Blacks, enslaved Blacks, and also breaking it down from Black females, enslaved free males, enslaved males, free males of Black race, and also the total population of each of the different counties. So as you see, for instance, in Baltimore City, if you look in the middle, this column that I have right now denotes 1860. It goes from 1790 to 1880 is what's on this website, which you can still get to the Maryland State Archives. Yes, I've said that word a million times because that's where I work. This is for 1860. And if you cut to the sides, you can see how at the time of 1860, the dawn of the Civil War, 83,942 persons of color were free. 87,189 persons of color were enslaved. In Baltimore City, for instance, the total population was 212,418 individuals. The total enslaved population was only, and I'll say that when I give you a comparison, was only 2,218. The free Black population in Baltimore at that time was 25,680. Now, for instance, notice a change with that and let's say Prince George's County. Prince George's County, a total enslaved population, a total population of 23,327 individuals, of which 12,479 were enslaved, and only 1,198 were free. So almost a 10-to-1 ratio flip-flop from those two areas. And also to show you or remind you of the bottom, which is on the side, the total amount was almost 50-50 free and enslaved population at the dawn of the Civil War in Maryland. Next slide. Something else that I did not know, I was born in Washington, D.C., and these two iconic figures, I did not know that they were Maryland born. And I think many people, when I go to different conferences or sessions where I have, again, younger people there, and I ask them, where do you think Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were born, or where do you think they're from? Usually they'll say South Carolina, Georgia, or something of that. They won't say Maryland unless they probably have really, really studied or something like that. It's not as commonplace as you would think it might be, because we live in Maryland, or those of us who are listening, who are watching in Maryland, we know this because we're from here and we've heard it so many times, hopefully. But they were from the Eastern Shore, and they were born in two neighboring counties, Talbot County for Frederick Douglass, in Dorchester County for Harriet Tubman. Frederick Douglass, we believe in 1818, and we do have a document which we consider to be the only thing that approximately lists his birth, and Harriet Tubman. And we have another document which you think approximately lists her birth as being 1822, both in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Next slide. Did Harriet Tubman rescue 300 persons from slavery over 19 trips? This is a belief that even has become a poem. In a presentation that I was viewing, I wasn't a part of it, but I was viewing it. There were these two very delightful teenage girls who did a poem, and a poem had this line in it. However, research has shown that that's not exactly true. Next slide. This is an ad that we found in among the newspapers of our study, which is 1860 of July. I think it's July 1st, 1860. Unfortunately, it's blocked out right now, but it's 1860. And this is what it says, literally. A female conductor of the Underground Railroad at the late Women's Rights Convention at Melodeon Hall, Boston. The most interesting incident was the appearance on the platform of the colored woman, Mrs. Harriet Tubman, who has been 8 times south and brought into freedom no less than 40 persons, including her aged father and mother over 70 years old. So I remind you of this for 2 reasons. One is that this is Harriet Tubman herself saying what she did. Now, subsequent research has suggested to us that she actually rescued 70 people, approximately 70 people over 13 rescues, but not 300 over 19 trips. The other thing I want to stress is that this is in 1860. Slavery does not end in Maryland until 1864. So even though she's in Massachusetts, because of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, someone could have taken upon themselves, if they had the resources, to track her down and bring her back to her owners for whatever the reward would have been at that time. So this is another example of how brave she was to feel that she could do this, because regardless of how many people she was around who she felt comfortable and safe with, someone else, after reading this article, because this article was published in a Maryland newspaper, even though it occurred in Massachusetts, could have taken it upon themselves to seek her out for a reward. Next slide. There's another, and I heard this one years and years ago, and I think there's a slide of this or something that looks, I'd say, arguably authentic, saying that there was a $100,000 reward for Harriet Tubman. We have not found anything saying that. A $100,000 reward, that's a lot of money now. That's the equivalent of probably millions of dollars at that time. This is what we have found, or was found, in a Dorchester County newspaper owned by a private family regarding the actual escape of Harriet Tubman and her brothers and the value that was given to that issue if somebody was to bring them back. Her name was Minty Araminta Ross, is her actual given name. And as you see in here, ran away from the subscriber on Monday the 17th, 3 Negroes named as follows. Harry, aged about 19 years, has on one side of his neck a wen, not sure what that is, a wen just under the N. He is of dark chestnut color, about 5 feet 8 or 9 inches high. Ben, aged about 25 years, is very quick to speak when spoken to. He is of a chestnut color, about 6 feet high. And Minty, aged about 27 years, is of a chestnut color, fine looking, and about 5 feet high. And that's Harriet Tubman, who was called Minty, short for from Araminta. And she was only 5 feet tall. So this is the closest we have of anything or any reward that was placed on her head. And this is before she became known as Harriet Tubman. So there's no truth to the fact of a $100,000 reward for Harriet Tubman. Next slide. Something else that I think, I don't think people deny this, but it was surprising to me to find this, is that people acknowledged it even in ads, which they just ran in the newspaper, like a regular classified ad. This is February 15th, 1841. My daughter Zippy Jones, having on Thursday night last, without my knowledge or consent, got married to Wiley Bailey, who has already 2 wives living. And I fearing that she will leave here for the north, this is to caution all persons connected with the railroads not to take her as a passenger, as she is not free. She is of yellow complexion, has a large head of hair and a flat nose. Bailey is an old dandy and also has a flat nose. So here's Robert Jones, who's not only putting out a runaway ad for his enslaved person, he's acknowledging that this enslaved person is his daughter. So many times it's been talked about how people visited Slave Row, so to speak, and that the master would have children who would look like him running around, but there'd be this silent acknowledgement that these are probably the children of either the master or somebody else on the plantation. However, it wasn't usually that part of the interracial relationships wasn't spoken about openly. However, this person is putting it right out there that his daughter, who is his property, has been married to a bigamist. So to some degree, I wonder, what is he really upset about? Is he upset about her? He's only charging $5, or he's only asking $5, or is he also upset that she's run off with a bigamist? Either way, he's putting it out there that this is my daughter who I have enslaved, and I want her back for a reward. Next slide. Something else that I was very shocked to find, or very surprised to find, and also that I think reminds us that things that we not take for granted that they occur today, but think that they never would have occurred before, is that this ad that we found by, again, randomly going through our runaway domestic traffic notices and committal notices about persons during the time of slavery. September 29th, 1851, was committed to jail of Baltimore City and County on the 23rd day of September, 1851 by D.C. H. Borley, Esquire, a justice of the peace of the state of Maryland, in and for the city of Baltimore. As a runaway, a Negro man who calls himself Mary Ann Waters, about 28 years of age, 5 feet 2.5 inches high, stout built, very black complexion, and has a scar on his left ear. Said Negro had on, when committed, a dark-figured mousseline delaine dress, blue velvet mantilla, white satin bonnet, and figured scarf. Says he is free, was born in Elkridge, and has been hiring out in the city of Baltimore as a woman for the last 3 years. Now, certainly today, we talk so much about people who are dressing other than what their birth assignation was, and feel like, oh my God, the world has gone crazy. This never would have happened years ago. But here it is in 1851, and a person has been living as a woman for 3 years and is free. And also notice that in this ad, there doesn't seem to be any, I'd say, editorialization against this individual. Whereas today, you can imagine how someone described in this way might be described by certain publications or by certain individuals who would have a different mindset about this individual for living their life. Next slide. Assisting enslaved persons, as we could see, because there was a reward in these runaway ads, there was a penalty to be paid, as we saw even from the 1664. You could be charged, you could be jailed, you could be charged pounds of tobacco. So assisting enslaved persons to escape, I should have edited it out, was a crime. Was emancipating also a disease? Apparently it was. Drapetomania was a supposed mental illness described by American physician Samuel A. Cartwright in 1851 that caused Black slaves to flee captivity. Today, drapetomania is considered an example of pseudoscience and part of the edifice of scientific racism. I have this print, it's kind of small, but I'll try to read the $40 one just to see how it's alluded to in a way by some of these owners. $40 reward ran away from the subscriber, the one by Monica Jones. It's on your right as you're looking at the screen. State of Maryland to the 16th October last, a Negro man named Arnold. He is a middling stature and a very likely fellow, thick lips and a rather wide mouth, with the white of his eyes inclined to redness. His dress when he went off was a gray kersey jacket and pantaloons, tolerable good, And so I'll get to the point. He absented himself for no fault whatever and is probable for being resold to Georgia. I think that's a pretty good reason. He thought he was going to be sold to Georgia. Depending on who he was, where his life was, he might think that's a good reason to run away. Next slide. The U.S. population at the dawn of the Civil War. Now, just to remind people of just how much of a situation population-wise was going on at the time, I want to send you, let's let you read this as I start coughing for a second. Just the population of America at the dawn of the Civil War, total and enslaved persons. As you see, of the 9,000 person in the 11 states that later seceded in the South, 9 million, 33,500,000 were enslaved. Next slide. It's also often said that the Civil War was not fought over slavery. Take into account, and these I found online, the actual state constitutions of those southern states that seceded. These are just some examples of what they literally said. They clearly said that slavery was the reason that they were seceding from the Union and why they chose to ultimately fight the war. Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. Next slide. And why was it so important to fight to save slavery? The institution of slavery was big, big money. There's a site called measuringwords.com where scholars from Chicago have written about what the approximate value of enslaved persons were at the time. This is up to about 2018 is when I checked the site to compare these notes. Of the 87,189 individuals who were enslaved in Maryland at the time, according to this study, the average value of an enslaved person was $800. $800 in 2018, which of course is much more today, was $24,900. So if we just multiply $24,900 by 87,189, for Maryland alone, the approximate value of enslaved persons at the time of the Civil War was $2,171,006,100. So that would be the purchasing power just for the state of Maryland at the time, at the dawn of the Civil War. So that's a reason. That was a reason outside of also morally and racially coming up with reasons why this was okay morally. There's also the actual financial impact of enslaving other individuals that was benefiting the state of Maryland and the southern states. Next slide. The Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery everywhere. No, it did not. On September 22nd, 1862, the Emancipation Proclamation, as drafted by President Lincoln, is approved and goes into effect on January 1st, 1863, for all states in rebellion. What, of course, does that mean? Those states, of which I just showed you excerpts from their constitutions, were not paying attention to anything Honest Abe had to say. So certainly if he said to them also, and those enslaved persons that you have right now, they're not free. We've seceded from the Union, President Lincoln, so we don't pay attention to anything you say. There were some states that had slavery, which were called border states, which remained loyal to the Union. Maryland was one. So those individuals who were enslaved in Maryland were not freed due to the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation. The other border states where that was also a situation, or the reality, was Delaware, Missouri, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Next slide. Prior to the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation, freedom did come to enslaved people in Washington, D.C. by the D.C. Compensated Emancipation Act of 1862, which President Lincoln also signed. And it says simply, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America that all persons held to service or labor within the District of Columbia are hereby discharged and freed of and for all claim to such service, labor, and from and after the passage of this act, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except for crime, where the party shall be duly convicted, shall hereafter exist in said district. At that time, in 1860, the dawn of the Civil War, 11,131 individuals were free, 31,000 individuals were enslaved. Next slide. It was a split state. Maryland was very split. And these are some of the, just two examples, I'll show you two examples of what the passage was, or what the feeling was throughout the state about this situation. This is right prior to the DC emancipation from a Frederick County newspaper. Negro freedom. While Congress is laboring diligently for the emancipation of the Negroes and the Army and Navy are practically enforcing the wildest vagaries of the abolitionists and freeing the Negroes by thousands and turning them loose upon the country, the northern states are becoming justly alarmed with the apprehension of being overrun by thriftless, lazy persons of color. Not exactly in favor of freedom. At least this post, this editorial from Frederick County, Maryland in 1862, mere days before DC ends slavery in the city limits. Next slide. This is the actual passage of the Maryland Constitution, which ended slavery on November 1st, 1864. That's what it actually looks like in blue, certainly hard to read, but the actual text is below it. That hereafter in this state, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except in punishment of crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, and all persons held to service or labor as slaves are hereby declared free. That is a statute that ends slavery in Maryland, November 1st, 1864, not January 1st, 1863. Next slide. And it didn't pass by much. Just to show you the actual votes for the Constitution, the votes for, you see on the appendix, which is a little bit clearer to read. Vote on the Constitution, which was October 12th to 13th, 1864. For the Constitution, and for the Constitution means for the ending of slavery in Maryland. It ended up passing by 375 votes. The initial vote, which did not include votes from the federal troops, because certainly we were not getting votes from Confederate troops because they had seceded from the Union, it had lost by 29,799. I think that's right. 29,536 votes it would have lost. But because the federal troops votes was added, this measure passed by only 375 votes. The next slide. And there were some, certainly in Maryland, who were very, very happy about this. In Talbot County, this editorial says, those states are most prosperous which extend facilities to settlers, encourage their industry, and promote the happiness of the population. The influence of slavery is exerted permanently against these blessings. Remove that obstacle and the community spring forward in energy and prosperity of a new career. Maryland is free. The shackles of its slaves are stricken off by the action of its citizens, and are ere long those we have been most heartily opposed to the reform will be convinced by the inexorable logic of facts that they have permitted their prejudices to thwart their interests. Maryland is free. There is one slave state less in the Union. So again, a split state. November 11th, 1864, after slavery has ended in Maryland. Next slide. Obviously, there's Juneteenth, which happens in June 19th, 1865. This is an actual image of Ashton Villa, a picture from the historic site online, the home of then Colonel James Monroe Brown. On the balcony of this massive home is where the enslaved persons there heard from Gordon Granger that slavery was over and they were now free citizens. Next slide. It just should be noted that in the bottom of General Order 3, which is what General Granger read, it says, they are free. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. And they are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. So there still seems to be an amount of watch what you do, watch where you go, even after freedom is given to those individuals in Galveston, Texas. Next slide. I was asked not too long ago about why there are these records that we have, which are dated 1864 and past about slavery, if slavery ends in 1864 in Maryland. And that's because of what's called the slave statistics, which were put in place because those persons who remained loyal to the Union felt that they should be compensated for remaining loyal, especially after now those enslaved persons who had considerable value, as we saw earlier, were freed. So people went to, or representatives of the government went to these individuals who were enslavers and said, name the persons who were enslaved, give some statistics on who they were, and we will approximate value to them, and we will pay you for this. It never happened, but because of this, we have some extensive records for several counties, among which are Anne Arundel, Dorchester, Frederick, and Howard, and Kent, that will list many individuals who were enslaved at the time of November 1st, 1864. So for persons who are looking at this from a genealogical point of view of family history, it can be very important for you to find these records and perhaps see a link to one of your forebears in the slave statistics. But that's why these records about enslaved individuals exist past the time that slavery ended. Next slide. We have on our website a frequently asked questions site, which unfortunately right here is very small print, but we have that on our Legacy of Slavery website. You can go to that and see some of the other articles or mentions that I have gone over today and some that I have not gone over today. And if you think of anything else that you find and you've vetted and you're sure of, that please send them to me, and I will try to have them added to this. And if you find anything that is a surprise or anything that you question, I can certainly look into that myself, as long as it has to do with Maryland. There's some other things that were federal, which I know about too, but I didn't think I had time to go in those today. But I would say also look online, always look online for more than one source, and make sure that the source you look on is not a repeat of the source that you just looked at, if you're trying to confirm something that you wonder if it's true or not. Next slide. Just to show you the sources that we have at the Maryland State Archives that you can go to if you're trying to find advice or guidance into doing your own genealogy. This is something that we have in person, I mean, as a physical copy, but also available online on the Legacy of Slavery website. Researching African-American Families at the Maryland State Archives. It will list all of the different records where you can find information about persons of African descent that we know were entitled with that. Saying it could be the Negro census or or as I said, slave statistics, things of that sort. There are certainly records within land records and probably within wills, which may also include information about enslaved free Blacks and enslaved Blacks, but we don't know that because it doesn't say it at the series level as far as the title goes. But this will give you more clarity as to what you can even look for online, at least as far as if we have it or not. And next slide. Also, we completed this about 2 or 3 years ago, a guide to the history of slavery in Maryland, written by renowned author and historian Ira Berlin, who has sadly passed on, an overview of the arc of slavery in Maryland, from its beginning, as I mentioned, with the landing of the Ark and the Dove, to post Civil War Reconstruction period of how the legacy of slavery affected those after it was abolished in Maryland. Next slide. This is about 2 years ago, but this is approximately how many records we have available within our database that you can look through and hopefully find a gold mine for yourself. Roughly 12,105 runaway ads, 22,911 certificates of freedom, 7,247 manumissions, and noting free and enslaved Blacks and mulattoes, and 206,996 census records. And as I said, other prominent information might be found in wills and land records, but we can't tell that because it hasn't been looked at thoroughly just for that. This image right here is of an individual whose certificate of freedom, I sent it to or shared it with an illustrator from a police department, I think it was in Charles County, who was their graphic design artist. Such as, there's a sketch artist who will make up images based on people who have committed crimes or whatever, or lost individuals, to try to find them. I asked him if he would be able to come up with an illustration based on the terms or the words that was used to describe this individual. Because remember, at that time, this person who was freed, all they had was the certificate of freedom to vouch for their freedom. The fact that they had the right to walk from one place to another place, they weren't enslaved or owned by anybody else. And for this individual named Maul, this is the actual image that the graphic artist came up with. None of us know if she really looked like this, but my thought is that for a person who was looking at her, this is what they might have seen to help them accept the fact that this was indeed her certificate of freedom and not someone else's. And I think that's it for today. Next slide will show. Let's see. Yes, it is. Thank you. I'm available for any questions if I haven't taken up all the time. And I think it looks like I might have.
Hi, Chris, this is Shantae. You have taken up all the time and our heads are just swelled with information. And I want to thank you so much. The work that you're doing is very important to not only just the slave legacy, but also to all people. We were talking today in Black history, African-American history, it's history. It's not just one little group of what happened then. It connects us all. So we all are connected in some way. And I want to tell everyone that attended today, thank you so much. And next month, we will have Women of the Movement, which is a partnership with the BMI and the Peel. That's what the Heritage Area actually does. We connect museums. We are the partners. We are the glue. And we are bringing programs to you and stories from these very special places. So please support your local museums. And if there's any questions that you were not unable to get answered today, you may email them to us, info@explorebaltimore.org, and I will get them to Chris. Or Chris also provided some information to you where he is at the State Archives. So thank you so much to everyone and have a wonderful weekend. And let's hope that spring will arrive soon. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shantae. Thank you, Peel Museum. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.